Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Business Stars podcast from the Meinders School of Business at Oklahoma City University. I'm your host, Kyle Golding, and I'm joined today by Dr. Robin Walker. She's DBA, MBA, and CPA, the Associate Professor of Accounting and the Chair of the Department of Accounting and Finance here at the Meinders School of Business. Good to see you today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Today, we're going to talk about an article that you recently had published. That article is The Accounting Student's Perception of Teaching and Assessment Methods. It was published in the Journal of Education for Business, and you're one of the authors along with Teri and Sarah Borchers.
Yes.
Okay. First of all, it's a great honor to have an article published. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We're happy that you, as part of the faculty here at the Meinders School of Business, we're, of course, encourage you guys to write articles, be published, etc. Is this your first article you've had published recently?
Within the last year.
Within the last year? Okay.
There were a couple the year before, yeah.
So, and were they published in this publication or different publications?
One of them might have been, there were some different publications.
Okay.
There have been a few different.
So give us the premise for this article.
Okay. So the reason that we feel this article is important is because in accounting and the CPA world, we have a shortage, and they have dubbed this the pipeline problem. So the accounting pipeline problem or CPA problem, because we're having a shortage of accountants and CPAs.
Right.
And
the industry wants more than we can supply, right?
Right. And, there have been a lot of, looked at it from a lot of different angles. And one angle on a national podcast, accounting educators were called boring accounting professors.
Oh, that hurts.
So can we look and see? So what we did was our survey took perceptions of the students, not what I think, how do I think I'm doing? Mm-hmm. That might be different than what do the students like to, what do they value for instructional methods in the classroom and assessment methods, like how do we test them? How do we find out for sure what they know? So that's what we looked at, and hopefully that we can see, are we part of the problem, or how can we be part of the solution and make it engaging in the classroom and retain those students and maybe attract more and hopefully help with a piece of that pipeline problem.
So just by examining the status quo, we can potentially create a better way of attracting students, retaining students, mm-hmm. and ultimately generating more accountants to meet the needs of industry?
Yes, correct.
So with that premise for the article, what was your process of addressing that question?
Okay, so we wanted to find out which methods the students prefer, and this is based on their self-reported perceptions. So what do they prefer for teaching and then also for assessment? So we used a Google survey, and we issued that to accounting students. So that was students in accounting courses. From 100 level, 100 or 1,000, depending on your school, up to 400 or 4,000. And they were asked questions about different instructional methods, assessment methods. There were a few other questions in there. And we were able to issue that survey to 3 separate universities. So a lot of the research in the past had 1 or 2 universities, so we wanted to be the first that had 3 universities. So our survey was administered at the University of Alaska, University of Portland, and University of Nebraska.
Okay. Any specific reason you chose those 3?
That's where each of us was
okay,
teaching at the time.
Okay, that makes sense. So some of the findings, I'm gonna kind of list some of the findings, and then I'm gonna have you to kind of elaborate and explain these. So that students valued instructional approaches that offer a deeper comprehension of the course material, transcending what's solely in the textbook. Mm-hmm. That's one finding. So what exactly did you learn from going through the data to get to that finding?
That students value when an instructor would go through examples in the classroom, go through examples like textbook examples or homework examples. They also valued real world examples, and especially examples, professional examples from the instructor's background, if they had worked in accounting before.
So not just teaching from the textbook, but
right,
really kind of connecting it to the real world.
Right. So you can start with the textbook and then take it up a notch and show that, yes, you actually will use that information.
That makes sense.
In the real world.
That makes sense. I think in most educational scenarios, right, the students do not prefer more than just the textbook material.
I would think so, yes.
Another finding was that in class demonstrations, real-world examples, instructors' own professional experience, right? You just said that. So those real-world experiences really added to what the students were looking for.
Right, yes.
So from that, you created a whole series of assessments to what we can all learn from this research. So what were some of these assessments that someone listening now, maybe if they are a instructor themselves, a member of faculty, or maybe a student who's considering going into this field, what are some of the things that they could learn if they were to read this article?
So we listed several types of assessments, like what would they be graded on? A research paper, either a long one or a short one, an exam that has written or essay type problems, or multiple choice problems, or a group project, or a presentation that they give in class. And one of the assessment methods that we listed was attendance. And it was attendance that got the highest ranking.
From the students?
From the students.
Okay.
And that's what they desired for an assessment. And first we were like, does this mean they're just looking for the path of least resistance? But after discussing it, we felt that maybe what they were saying was that they appreciate assessments that are straightforward and objective instead of a subjective grading, such as, if I'm on a group project, there's a lot of questions there, like, how am I going to be graded on this? I feel like I don't have control. So maybe the student just wants more control of how they're being assessed.
So less ambiguity in the process,
Yep.
More involvement, maybe more them playing a role, an active role, as opposed to just hearing a lecture or reading a textbook.
Yeah, maybe more clarity on, how they're going to be assessed. They understand attendance. That's black and white.
So along with attendance, what are some other of the other assessments that kind of rose to the top?
I don't think anybody really wanted the term papers. But that's typical with accounting.
Right.
We don't have a lot of writing in accounting, but they did prefer the multiple choice questions over the written. And there can be different opinions on why they would say that. There again, it could just be less ambiguity there.
As the professor, as the educator, which do you prefer assigning to your students? Do you find value or difference in a written question versus a multiple choice, specifically to accounting?
Ideally, I like to use a combination of both. You can cover more ground with the multiple choice questions, but they're not going to guess them all correct. But when you have them do something handwritten, then you're more sure that they do understand the content.
Showing their work a little bit more. That makes sense.
Yes.
What are some of the other assessments maybe that surprised you, that maybe were more important than you expected or less important than you expected them to be?
I don't know if it was surprising, but they did received higher marks to have an open book exam as opposed to a closed book exam. So not surprising, but
right.
I don't know if that's the times that we're in.
Could be, right? Data is more accessible to students these days, and so maybe they feel that makes them, again, maybe part of the process.
Yeah, or maybe that is more real world, because now if you're a CPA, you've got the internet right there.
Right.
Whereas, I didn't have that when I started.
Right. As the world changes, our approach at the university has to change as well, right?
Yeah.
So any other surprising findings in the research?
I guess that, and I don't know about surprising, but reassuring that they do value the real world examples and examples from our own professional backgrounds.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
And I guess we also compared in-person to online. So we gave this survey during COVID. So at that point, we felt that there was a pretty strong possibility that all the students had in-person classes and online classes.
At least had some access to some online classes.
Right. And so these were the same students, and so they gave higher marks for the teaching methods than in the in-person than in the online. So we felt that showed that they actually do value what goes on in the classroom if it's a rich experience. If they're getting more than just what's in the textbook.
Right.
And then the online, when we compare online to in-person, the online, on that question, they gave higher marks to the assessments. And so we didn't know if they prefer to be assessed in the privacy of their own home or their own environment. And that could bring up some questions too.
Right.
You know, is there less anxiety there if they're alone, mm-hmm. or is there room for academic misconduct?
Which is always the potential for an online scenario, right?
Right.
That has to be considered.
Yes.
For yourself, as someone who teaches classes, have you taken any of these findings and some of the thought process behind it, and have you adjusted your approach to teaching classes here at Meinders School of Business?
Yeah, I like to, in the in-person, you do have more opportunity to add the real world experiences, but I do think I need to remind myself that maybe I need to refresh my videos or offer extra videos on real world experiences.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So quickly give the audience listening some of your real world experiences. What is some of your history and background professionally and educationally that led you here to ultimately being at Meinders School of Business and publishing articles like this?
So my background is in tax in CPA firms, and it's usually smaller companies. So some of my classes we teach generally accepted accounting principles, which is GAAP. And that's required by the publicly traded companies, the larger companies. They are required to follow GAAP. But then I can say, okay, so in my world, when I was doing tax returns, these were smaller entities, so they were not required to follow GAAP. So this is how you would actually do this for a smaller company.
Right. So give them both ways
yeah,
of
so
applying.
they can see both ways. And then we can look at some, like we were just talking about depreciation. Okay, this is how we do it for accounting purposes, but for tax purposes, we would do some other things and just show them how they're going to have to know. They might have to know both approaches when they're working someday.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So for a high school student who's considering maybe studying accounting in college, maybe in 6 months or a year or two, and maybe a parent who's considering talking to their young person about maybe getting an accounting degree because of all the benefits we talked about earlier by getting hired and in demand, give me a brief description, a less than 2-minute description of this article and what someone would take away if they were to read the article.
I guess accounting educators are paying attention to what they are doing in the classroom because they want to make sure they're engaging students, and we're trying to make it a rich experience and give them the information they need and also make it fair when it comes to assessments. We're not trying to use trickery or make it more difficult than it needs to be. So we want to give you knowledge above the textbook and then assess that in a fair manner, and we are always willing to listen to any concerns or recommendations.
And we're doing research in order to make sure that we're doing that by doing practices like this.
Mm-hmm. And this opens up doors for many more questions and more research to find out, what students are actually thinking.
The continual process of always elevating our techniques to provide the best education for our students. There you have it, folks, directly from Dr. Robin Walker, the chair of our accounting department here at the Meinders School of Business. We appreciate you guys listening to this conversation. Hopefully you guys will check out the article. It will be linked in the show notes. If this is your first time hearing the podcast, please make sure and subscribe. If this is your second or third or fourth time listening to the podcast, we hope you continue to subscribe as well. I appreciate your time being on the podcast with me today. And for you guys, look out for future episodes of the Business Stars podcast coming to you soon.